Hello class, this video is a tutorial on how to set up your orthographic for Project 4. So in terms of workflow, you could do this before your final concept. I'm doing it after my final, just so I know what I want it to look like. Obviously, if you do it before your final, you'll be doing some designing as you go about this. But for me, I find it easier to translate an existing design into the orthographic views. So I'm in Illustrator. I have a pre-made JPEG with my final sketch here and some rough dimensions of what I'm looking for. For your projects, the way you can get these dimensions are by studying an existing object. So if you're doing earbuds, you could measure existing earbuds or go online and find out what their general proportions are. Look at your design and just make some kind of educated guesses as to how wide and tall and deep the object is. And you'll see why this is important in a minute. So I also made the page nice and big because I encourage you work at full scale. If you're in Illustrator, um, when it opens to default, this little black border is my actual page. So you can change that by going over to this icon here. It's the artboard tool. And you could either drag the artboard size around, or you could come over here and type in the size. I know that I made my JPEG size 44 inches by 44 inches, and just hit enter or click away. And now I can drag my JPEG centered on here, if that kind of box in the middle bothers you. So working full scale is helpful because when you put the dimensions on, you want to know how tall and get all your measurements on. And these are just kind of some overall dimensions to help guide me. But when I dimension this object out, maybe I might want to throw in one or two more. For what it's worth, though, the requirement is just the overall dimensions. So in this case, it'd be height, overall width, not just this part, and then the depth. And the number of dimensions will, that's the bare minimum, is to get those three. An object like mine, it might make more sense to also dimension out like how wide is the folded up stand, maybe the height of the handle. You'll see all of that later when I finish it. So to begin with, the reason that I have these dimensions is now I can use this rectangle tool in Illustrator to help create some boxes that will be my guide for when I start to sketch out my orthographic. If your Illustrator view looks different than mine and you want it to align, you can try going to Window, Workspace, and Reset Essentials. And that's what I have mine set to. A quick review on Illustrator. So over here on the Layers tab, it's just like Photoshop. Think of the layers as like stacks of paper on top of each other. This base layer is my guide, so I'm just going to go ahead and click this blank space here, which creates a lock. It means that now I can't drag it. And I'll put all of my boxes on this layer here, which I created by clicking this page. More Illustrator coverage. So a little bit later, I'll be using this pen tool to draw my orthographics. Wherever I click, I create an anchor points, and then it creates a line that connects those anchor points. If you click and drag, you get these tabs or these little ears that you can bend the line to however you want it, if you want to get it to be more smooth. These two boxes here, they determine the properties of the line. So right now it has a white fill, which is useless because you guys can't really see that. If I flip this, the red line means like transparent or nothing. If I double click on this white line, go down here, drag it to black. If I now click away, I now have a black line. So again, I'll be using this pen tool to trace my object later. So that's a good tool to know. Then of course there's these two selection tools. The difference is this is the black arrow is just what's called the selection tool. It'll select your whole object. The white arrow is called the direct selection tool. If I click here, it's only selecting that line, and it starts to bend it. If I click on one of these anchors, it only drags that anchor. So that's also a useful tool to Now if I click on this line with the direct selection tool, oops, that was an anchor, click on this line and hit delete, it deletes just that line. If I use my black arrow or selection tool and I click on this, it deletes the whole shape. In terms of navigation within Illustrator, it's the same as Photoshop. I hold down spacebar, gives me this hand to drag my page around. Spacebar plus Control on my PC is zoom in. I'm going to assume that's spacebar plus Command, I think, on a Mac. And then spacebar, Control, and Alt is zoom out. And that would be spacebar, Command, and Option, I believe, on a Mac. So that's just some basics of how I navigate through here. Now, of course, the other thing we'll be using is this shape rectangle tool. If you click and hold down, there's different shapes, but for now I'm just going to use the main rectangle tool. So to get started, once you have this step done, reviewing an existing object and getting your general proportions, we can start to lay out our orthographic just with rectangles to begin with. So again, I have a new layer here, which I got by clicking that sheet. And now what I can do is I can click and drag to create a rectangle. If I go back to my properties here, it tells me the width and the height of this rectangle. So to begin with, I want to create a rectangle that represents this front face. So I want something that's 8 inches wide. So I can just go ahead and type that in here. And 20 inches tall. So I can go and type that in there. Now, this is a little bit confusing actually. This whole thing is 4 inches round. It's kind of the way I see this stand. So I want my stand to be off to the right, which maybe is a bit confusing because it's opposite of this. But anyway, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and drag this rectangle over to the side. And now I can make this width 4 inches wide. And now this represents my stand. And essentially that's all I really need for my front view. I guess I do have this here marked, this 3-inch tall handle marked here, so I could drop that in. So I made another rectangle. Over here, type in 3 for the height. Align it. And now that's roughly where my handle will be. So I'm going to go around and continue this for all of the other views. So if I drag this view up, I know that this overall width is 3.5 inches wide. So 3.5. It's 12 inches wide overall because it's 8 plus 4. Again, I probably should have written this dimension down here for a little more clarity. So there's my top view. I could drag this up to make sure everything aligns, and now I have, this is roughly where my, let's see, I want this to be a 4x4 square. You can also click to create a rectangle, and it'll prompt you for dimensions. So that's my stand there. I'm going to pause here and recap orthographic views with you all. You guys, I assume most of you know this, but again, just want to cover it for Project 4 so there are no mistakes. I'll include this page sent out, with this video. But there are essentially 2 options for orthographic views. There's first angle projection and third angle projection. Basically, they're kind of opposites of each other to some degree. First angle is used in China, third angle is used in the US. I will be using third angle. It makes a little bit more sense in my head. Again, though, I don't mind which one you guys pick as long as you're consistent. So in third angle, the view above the object is the top view. The view below the object is the bottom view. And here we can see the front of the car is facing left, so we see the front of the car in the left view. And the back of the car is facing right. We see the back of the car in the right view. First angle projection is the opposite. It's as if you're rotating the object in your hands. So here I have, imagine I'm holding a toy car. If I rotate it away from me, I'll see the bottom above it. Again, as long as you're consistent, just don't combine the two. So if you have the top view above your object and then the back of the car on the left here, that'll be marked wrong. So with my object here, this is my main view. So I'm going to have my top view here. Again, I have my stand off to the right. that means that my view to the left, because this edge in my drawing here is facing left in my orthographic, this is the edge that we should see on this left view here. So I hope that's clear. Please don't make that mistake with Project 4. So I'm going to click to create a rectangle. I can see with my dimensions here, I want it to be 20 inches tall by 3.5 inches wide. It's worth noting that if you don't default to inches here, you can always type in, the measurement you want. So I just typed in millimeters and it made that conversion for me. So if for some reason your Illustrator is different, you can always type in whatever metric system you want, or English system. So I will drag this over, but I also know that I have a 4x4 stand behind here. So again, I'll drag another rectangle, go over to my properties here, make sure that it's 4 inches wide. Something that might help you is this alignment table, or what, I don't know what to call this like alignment property tab. If I select both of these shapes and click on this, it'll center them on each other. Let's see, I think that's it. I could take this and drag it over just to make sure I have the handle height aligned. I can double check, that's 3.5 inches wide. This is 3.5 inches wide, so we're good. So now at this stage, I'm going to go into Sketchbook Pro and start to roughly sketch out this light using this underlay for, to start my orthographic. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to save it out as a JPEG. I guess I could do a PDF. If you want to save it out as a JPEG, you can go export as, and here we go, JPEG. I'm just going to save it over this old JPEG. Say yes, go ahead and write over it. Maximum file size. Now go ahead and launch Sketchbook Pro. So for some reason it made the width 55 inches wide. I'm not entirely sure why it did that, but anyway. Yeah, hopefully this is still full scale. If it's not, I can always then resize it to match my full scale drawing. So it may not hurt to save this as a backup. So I'm just going to save this as an Illustrator file, just in case I need it. All right, so now that I'm in Sketchbook Pro, let's see, the other way you could do this, you could print it out and you could do this by hand, analog style. The only thing is it's going to be hard to work full scale by hand analog style. You could always scan it in and then scale it back up to match your original Illustrator. However you see fit for this stage of the process. So I'm going to lock this layer by holding down here, dragging to the bottom left and locking it. I'm going to take this fresh layer up here. And so now I have rough guides where to draw my light. And I have a visual guide up here on the left of how this is going to look. So I will start with the main view here. And I'll talk through part of it, but then I'll speed up the video so that you guys don't have to sit and watch me draw this because it might take a bit of time. But definitely use this mirror tool to your advantage. This is another reason why it'd be good to use Sketchbook Pro if you can, in place of doing this analog. Because then whatever you draw on one side will be repeated on the other. And that should save you a little bit of time as you work through this. It doesn't hurt too, as you draw, to draw all the way across. You'll see me do this consistently. And again, this is all just for the sake of alignment. It is also possible. So my plan is to go back in Illustrator and complete this in Illustrator. It is possible, if you want to take the time to do really nice clean line work in Sketchbook Pro, complete your orthographic using Sketchbook Pro. But again, I'm doing a rough pass to begin with, just to get all of my proportions figured out. And judging by eye, I'm just looking at my design up here and constantly tweaking and trying to match it so that it looks right. It's really just kind of a judge by eye sort of game. Once you have your rough pass done in Sketchbook, you can do one of two things. You could lighten your layer and then finish the orthographic view in Sketchbook by doing clean line work. You could port it to Illustrator, which is what I plan to do. But before I do that, I guess I kind of going to do a bit of both, which maybe it's a little bit more work. But my reasoning is, the cleaner my line work is, the easier it'll be once I'm in Illustrator to clean it up. So I'm going to go ahead and just lower both of these layers to make sure that I can use them as an underlay, and I'm just going to do another quick pass here. Using some of these straight lines, line tool perhaps, to just try and clean this all up. And again, using my this mirrored line to help me out as I work through this. So now that I'm done looking at this, if I compare my final line work to my original, it's looking like my orthographic is just a little bit proportionally taller than my original. So perhaps this 20 inches was the wrong measurement. It is possible, since I'm digital, to make some tweaks. What I'll do is I'll copy this layer so that I don't destroy it. I can always revert back if I need to. And I'm just going to copy this here, and holding down V as in Victor, I can just kind of drag this up a bit until this looks a little bit closer proportionally to my drawing in the top left there. That's a little bit better. So I shortened that maybe by an inch, 2 inches. So yeah, just double check. Maybe it probably would have been better for me to have caught that before during like sort of the rough stage. Definitely something that you want to check and catch, because that is one thing I'll be looking at when I grade this, is looking at the proportions of the object. And of course, don't forget like all the little details. So in this instance, this kind of like cut in the middle here, trying to find the right place for that. You can always take a fresh layer, and that way you can then slide it till it looks like it's about centered. And again, for me, I'm about to go into Illustrator, so I'm just trying to get a rough idea of where this is going to line up. All right, so with that, I will save it, and then I'm just going to save it out as a JPEG, because I'm going to just go straight into Illustrator with this. I don't want to have to go into Photoshop or anything. Sure, I'll call it Ortho 4. All right, go ahead and close that. So now I can go to File, Open in Illustrator, and open up this JPEG I just created. Once again, the artboard, that's what this rectangle is probably default to 11 by 17. I can come in here and change it to 44 inches by 44 inches, and now I have my image here ready for tracing. One thing I'm going to do is when I'm clicked on my image, I'm going to go to Properties over here, and I'm just going to knock this opacity down to maybe like 40. And then back on this layer, I'm going to lock it, and then create a new layer up here. And so now, like I mentioned, be using the pen tool to trace over all of these lines and make them, nice and clean. And that's kind of why I took the time to do this clean pass. It'll make my life a little bit easier. And just like we did before, where we only drew half of this in Sketchbook Pro, I can draw half of it now and just copy it in Illustrator. So again, just changing my line settings to be black. And I'm just going to go over all of these lines. It's just a matter of tracing. You'll notice I did these sort of like double lines in Illustrator, or sorry, in Sketchbook. To me, it helps to show, it gives like a little bit more dimensionality to your orthographic. It kind of shows like a softer edge. It represents like a bit of a fillet through your corners. So it's something I encourage you to do. I think it makes the orthographic look a little bit more technical and accurate as you work through this. So with the pen tool, right now I'm holding Control and again probably Command on a Mac, and that brings up my direct selection arrow. Can hit Escape to get out of the drawing tool. So once you have part of your object traced, there's some things you can do. So firstly, I'm just going to change this. Because I'm working full scale, my object's relatively large. My line work is showing up really thin. So I'm going to go over here to Windows and turn on the Stroke tab. And I'm going to change my stroke. So my line weight, 4 is a bit too heavy. I'm just going to make it 2, just so hopefully you can all see it a little bit more clearly. But up until now, I've been working with straight lines. Again, if you use the direct selection tool and click in a corner, again, I think you all know this, a bit of a recap. It's going to drop this point here. If I click and drag it, it's going to round these corners out, which is something I recommend you do. Again, it's really rare that objects have all these like straight right angle corners. All right, now that I have most of my Illustrator line work done, I want to show you guys a couple things. Some of the techniques I was using as I was working through here. So firstly, when it comes to these pivot points, I can copy this, Control C or Command C, but the thing I want to show you is pasting in place, which here on my PC is Shift Control V. I'm going to assume it's Shift Command V on a Mac. And what that does is it drops the pasted object in the exact same location as where the copied object is. So if I want to align something, I use that quite a bit. Doesn't hurt to get some details in here, like, you know, if this is a pivot point, making it look a little bit like a bolt or something. The other trick I want to show you guys is, okay, if I'm putting in just like a little bit of like grip detail on the foot, I created a slot shape using this rounded rectangle. There might be a better way, but that's how I did it. But once I have this here, if I hold down Alt, or I think Option on a Mac, and drag this, it'll copy it, which I know you guys know that. But another trick is then if you go Object, Transform, and Transform again, it'll do the last command over. So again, on my PC, it's Control D. I'm going to assume it's Command D on a Mac. So if I just hit that twice, it just makes 2 more copies, moving them the same distance. You know, my initial distance didn't quite work out how I wanted, but that is another trick you can use. So again, here I'm going to copy it, Shift Control V to paste in place. Same kind of detail I put on the other kind of pivot point, you know, as if it's kind of like a screw maybe, or a giant kind of set screw that goes there. Now, it may not hurt actually at this stage. Obviously, don't forget to save. Always remember to do that. Yeah, I've done all this work and haven't saved it all. My computer crashed. That would have been a not happy moments. Other things to show you guys. So here, if I want to trim out this circle, well, firstly, I can do my paste in place trick to get these other 2 circles. But let's say that, you know, I don't want this circle to pass through here. If I click and hold on the pen tool, there's an add anchor point. If I click along here and highlight until I see, you know, my red line here, and click on it, I'm adding anchor points where I want to cut the circle. And then if I go to my direct selection tool, I can click on this line. Oops. and I can delete out this inner portion of the circle. And what it does is it's selecting a line from that anchor point I added and then this middle anchor point here. But of course, we only need half this circle because we're about to mirror everything. So, which is the next step I want to show you guys. So I'm going to start down here. One thing that may not hurt to do is to group all the lines you want to copy. So actually, before I do this, I'm just going to copy this layer, just in case I mess up with my mirroring. So I just held down Alt and dragged this up. That way, if I mess up with my mirroring, I still have the kind of like raw file to work with. So what I'm doing here, again, I wasn't too careful with my lines down here. That could be better for sure. But I'm selecting this light half, this left half of my case, and I'm going to go Object and Group, or Control G or Command G. And what that does is now when I select this line, it selects it all as if it were one shape. I can now hit Alt and drag it over to the side. Now if I select my group and I go Object, Transform, Reflect, and flip it vertical, I now have this mirrored over onto this side. Now, really to do this properly, it would be ideal to go through and merge all of these anchor points. But I'm going to leave that step out. I guess you may not need to, because really all we need is the line work. You're not really doing a fill. That leads to problems when you're trying to like fill this with a color. But I'm going to try and skip that step and see if we can survive without it. Here I'm going to use this add anchor point again, because I don't need this line here. So I'm just going to, I should have done this before I mirrored it. Would have cut my steps in half. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and continue working around through all of these, mirroring. And then again, I'll slow the video back down to show you guys dimensioning, and then a final step of varying the line weights. So now that I have all of my line work, the final step is to just double check everything so it all makes sense. So okay, for example here, I have my pivot point that's located about this high. Obviously my pivot point looks a little low in here, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, or use my direct selection tool and drag all of these anchor points and just use my arrow tool to pump it up so that it looks like this pivot could exist within here. Of course, that changes things just a little bit. So it's kind of like final tweaking stage to get everything to look just a little bit, to make sure everything aligns. Again, don't try and avoid giving me reasons to take off points. If I see things that look like they do not align from view to view, that's an opportunity to lose some points on this project. The reason I'm taking this time to really show you guys this detailed orthographic is I want the orthographics for Project 4 to be really dialed in. And again, this is why I recommend Illustrator over Sketchbook Pro. If it's messy or there's any kind of like discrepancies, obviously minor discrepancies will lose less points, major discrepancies will lose more. So another discrepancy I'm noticing, I need to come in here and chop some of these things off. But for example, I have these kind of really big pivot points, kind of unintended from this view, that carried into the top view that I'm now realizing means we should see, you know, roughly, if I take a measurement here, I can take a rectangle tool and I can draw from this corner down to this edge here. And that, if I rotate this, we should see these kind of pivot points peeking out by this much in this front view, or side view rather, to the left here. So I'm just getting the height now from this view. Now if I hold down Shift and drag this, it will align these. And I'm realizing, you know, maybe we even see a little bit of this leg poking out from behind here. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop these lines in. So I centered my layer, I locked it. I'm going to create a new one now for my dimensioning. This is an important step of the process where I want to teach you guys proper dimensioning for project 4. I was pretty forgiving on project 3. So just some quick principles on dimensioning. Firstly, as you put your dimension lines on your object, I would take a different color. So in this instance, I'm taking kind of like a, you know, medium blue here. And we only need the overall dimensions for our objects. So here I'm kind of taking the widest point. In this case, it's from the stand, and using my smart alignment guides to set this up. And these are kind of like leader lines that are coming off the object. It helps clearly show what measurement we are pulling. And then you have this kind of like arrow line in between. And this is where it's helpful to work full scale, because now when I select this like arrow line, if I go to properties, I can see how tall the object is. It's 18.378 inches tall. Now these lines, it helps, again, if we're doing proper dimensioning. If you don't see these options here, you can click this little sandwich menu and click Show Options. If you don't see the stroke window, it's under Window Stroke. And once your arrow line is highlighted, you want to drop some arrows on the end. There's lots of options. Just, you know, I like arrow 9. And this has our overall dimension. I personally, when it comes to my orthographic, I like to dimension to the outside, so I'm not going to pull these lines to the inside. So with our overall dimensions, we have our overall heights. I'm going to go around now, and so I'm going to grab the overall width. And again, oops, I keep clicking once, and that's why that pops up. It's asking me what length I want to make my line, but clicking drag is what I want. Let's see if I can select this line. No, that doesn't work. So unfortunately for all these arrow lines, you have to do it manually. To select all of these. Now, of course, if we're just going for the major dimensions, you could get away with, so height and width, and then in this view, if I want to copy my work over so I don't have to redo it, let's see, you want to go to the widest point. So if this point up here is wider, which it is, I want to elongate this line all the way to the top. Same thing here, drag this all the way back over. And really that's the bare minimum that you need to do for your dimension lines. Of course, type in the value, but I want to show you guys how to add a little bit more information. So really, more important than this overall package is actually the size of the case. So let's say I want to give the dimension of this case in here. The proper way to do it, so again, because I have all this set up, I'm just going to copy this over. and align this inside arrow with the case so I don't have to redo it. Then use my direct selection tool. And actually, I don't need this line because the proper way to dimension is to reuse these leader lines whenever you can. So also the proper way to dimension, you'll notice just some compositional layouts. I have this arrow aligned with this arrow. Anytime you have a shorter dimension, you want to put it on the inside of the widest dimension. So what do I mean? If I take this here and drag it, grab this anchor point too, this would be wrong dimensioning. You never want to cross lines if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's unavoidable. I mean, I'm crossing lines here, that's okay, but in this instance, you want to try to avoid crossing these arrow lines. Again, it's all for the sake of composition and clarity. So if I want to show the width of this case, I'm going to drop that dimension in here. Same story for this one. And just like these are aligned, I want to try and align this over here. So if I want to show the width of this case, again, I'll use my direct selection tool, bring this back, use my smart guide to align it, and now just copy this line over. And now I have some dimensioning on my case. I could, if I want to show the height of it on this view, copy this over. Again, like I said, I like to try to keep my dimension to the outside, but more so here on the front view, I'd rather keep it consistent. I'm calling this the front view and this the side view. I'm going to keep this consistent to the side view. So I'm going to drag this down. Just think about layout and composition. You want it to look nice and clean and clear. You'll notice I'm leaving dimensioning off the top view. Most of my dimensions are visible here, but let's see, I could maybe get a couple more. So for example, maybe I want the width of the handle. Whenever possible, you want to try avoid crossing over your object when you can, but sometimes it's unavoidable. If you want to give it a diameter dimension, and again, I want to align this whenever I can with other arrows. So if I can take this and copy it up here, now I have that aligned. Dimensioning looks like this, where you have a bent line pointing to dimensioning a diameter looks like this. Here it helps, you want to have an arrow on the end, not that one, on this side, and then I would write what the diameter of this circle is on that. Really the final step is to go through, I guess there's two final steps. One is to add a thicker line weight around here, which I'm going to do in Photoshop. It's just going to make my orthographic pop a little bit more. The other is to type in the values on each of these arrow lines. So now keep in mind, I'm working at full scale. So you want to make your text nice and big, because when I drop this into my presentation, you know, it's going to be on a page size roughly that big. We want our dimensioning to be nice and legible. So what did we say this is? I would go around now and maybe write these all out. So this is 18.378. I can round that to 18.4. So again, because this is 44 inches big, don't forget to specify the units that you're in. Again, you want this nice and big so it's legible when you bring it into your presentation. Also doesn't hurt to match the color. And again, I did that by clicking on this, using the eyedropper tool, selecting one of these lines. It outlined the text. You could leave it like that if you wanted. It looks a little more technical, but it can be kind of confusing. So just inverting this so that it's a fill, not a stroke. This next one is 12.4. Here's another area where you want to be consistent, is if I'm going to the outside of the arrows, you want to stay that way. You also want to kind of center the dimension in the middle of the arrow. So let's see, this one is 7.62. Again, we'll just round it to 7.6. This one is 5.3. This one is 3.5. And this is why you're consistent, because then, reading this one might be a little confusing. You could make an argument to put this dimension here so there's less confusion. But again, I prefer consistency when it comes to these. Here, because it's in between, I could drag this over just to give a little more breathing room on the right side here. This is 15.4. This handle width is 1.6. Now, if you have a really small dimension, I noticed this on project 3 a couple times. I just want to give a quick example of this. So I'm just going to copy this over here as my example. Let's say you're trying to dimension a really, really small gap on your object. Please don't do something like that. This looks really funny. What's going on here? The proper way to do it is to take these leaders, and then you want to remove, in this instance, the top arrow, which grabbed the wrong one there. And that is the proper way to dimension a really small gap, is arrows on either side. This is another opportunity to lose points on this project, so please make sure you're dimensioning. You have leader lines, you change the color of your arrows and leader lines. You do your overall dimensions, and if you have smaller dimensions, make sure you put them inside of the widest dimension, and then try to get the dimensioning lines to align left to right and top down. And last but not least is this diameter here. Let's see if I click on this, if it'll give me the diameter properties. I'm not sure if it will. I have to go to my layer and unlock it, so I can click on this, and it's grouped. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to make a new layer, take an ellipse drawing tool, align it in the center, get it close. These dimensions don't have to be exact. It's not like we're manufacturing it. So now I have an ellipse on the inside, a circle on the inside. It's 3.32, and that's how I'm going to measure that. I'm going to drag this up here. Now, because it's a diameter, you have to add d equals so that they know we're talking about diameter, and it was 3.3. And there you have it. That's your dimensioning in Illustrator. Now, I want to do one last step, which I had mentioned before, is to bring this into Photoshop. So I'm going to export 2 JPEGs out of here. I'm going to export as JPEG, final C3 ortho 5. Make sure this is all maximum. We can leave it at 72 dpi, again, because it's 44 inches by 44 inches. I'm now going to export just the dimensioning. Leave all the settings the same so that they align. And now, in Photoshop, I will open up both these images I just created. And here's maybe where I'm going to now arrange it. So I'm going to create a new page, 11 inches by 8.5. This one I want at 200 dpi, so it's not pixelated. Double click this to unlock the background and say duplicate layer to this untitled document. Same thing here. I'm realizing now though, because I saved it out as a JPEG, it's not going to come in. Let's see if we can work with it. So first I want to hit multiply on my dimensioning here. And then I'm going to shrink all of this so that it fits on my 8.5 by 11 here. Maybe just a little bit more. And now you can see sort of my dimensioning got misaligned. So I'm going to have to re-drag this. So that everything lines up again. And on this layer, I'm going to turn off the background. So now what we want to do is we're trying to add a thicker line weight to the outside. So I'm going to grab this magic eraser tool. So the goal with this JPEG is to add a stroke, a thicker line weight to the outside. I'm going to grab a tool here called the magic eraser. You click and hold on your eraser icon. It's down here. It's similar to the magic wand tool in that it kind of selects. And actually, you know what? So the goal with this image is to add thicker line around the outside. I'm going to use my magic wand tool for this. It's under the quick selection tool. It's called the magic wand tool. And now if I click in this white area, you can see I get these like selection marching ants. So first I want to walk my way around and make sure I select everything I need. So this should also be deleted. Basically, we're trying to delete all of the white on the outside of the object and none of the white on the inside. And you'll see why in a minute. So now that I have this selection, let's see, this one looks good on the top. This here, we have a selection coming on the inside. I can see it's from a gap here. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option, I think, on a Mac. And what that does, sorry, let me back up. I'm grabbing my polygonal lasso tool here. And again, if you don't see it, it's under the lasso tool. And what this does is it creates a selection using straight lines. If I hold down Alt or Shift, or again, Alt or Option on a Mac, you should see that there's this little negative arrow or negative sign on the icon. If I hold down Shift, there's a plus sign. The negative sign means remove from selection. So I'm going to remove the interior selection here and just clicking around, come down here, because I want to leave this white interior. What we're going to do, we're going to use a command called a stroke, which is going to fill, it's going to add a thicker line just to the outside of our selection. So again, things like this, I don't need this selection to come all the way on the inside. This will look good coming up here. That's fine. This here, I believe it comes down the middle, so I don't necessarily need that. Whoops. So again, holding down Alt or Option to subtract. This is kind of a tricky area down here. I'm going to try and split this difference. Now, it is possible to do this step in Illustrator. If you want to select the outside lines and play with the stroke, there may be other tricks too. There's a million different ways to approach this. I think there's like a shape tool in Illustrator. So now that I have this, and it's a copy, so I can always revert back if I need to, I'm just going to hit delete. And now I've removed all of this extra white space that I don't need. And now if I go to layer, layer style, and stroke, you can play with these settings. And maybe I want it to be about 4 pixels wide. Hit OK, and now I have a stroke on this layer. If I ever want to change it, if there's this little FX symbol down here, if I double click on this, it brings this back up. I can see I have this stroke applied. Now if I turn this back on and again set to multiply, blend mode to multiply so that we can see our line work through here, I now have my orthographic. And this is ready to save. I think Final Ortho 5, and I will be ready to drop this into my presentation. All right, I realize that was a long video, but very important. So yeah, please email me with any questions. Thank you.